Imagine this. You're a waitress, serving one of the world's most powerful CEOs, and then, out of nowhere, he drops a bombshell that changes everything you thought you knew about your own family. A signature in a guest book, a forgotten past, and a mentor's secret that could rewrite history. Stay tuned to find out how one chance encounter unravels a hidden legacy and how Maya discovers her mother's extraordinary impact on a billionaire's life. It was a typical Tuesday evening at one of the most prestigious fine dining restaurants in downtown Manhattan, La Petite Étoile. The soft clinking of glasses, gentle laughter, and the melodic hum of the kitchen blended together in a symphony of elegance. The restaurant, known for attracting a high-end clientele, had the kind of atmosphere that seemed almost otherworldly, a place where business moguls and celebrities rubbed shoulders with influencers and royalty. It was a haven for the elite, and tonight was no different. At the corner table near the window, Thomas Whitaker, one of the wealthiest CEOs in the world, sat with his usual air of detachment. He was the embodiment of the American dream, self-made, powerful, and constantly in motion. His empire spanned continents, and his name was synonymous with success. But there was something about Whitaker that always seemed cold, almost robotic. His sharp jawline and meticulously tailored black suit, which he wore every day, made him look more like a statue than a man. Today had been another grueling day, back-to-back meetings with investors, discussions about mergers and endless negotiations. He had just closed a deal worth millions, and yet here he was, alone in this exclusive restaurant, sipping on a glass of red wine, trying to wind down. But his mind was always busy, always preoccupied with the next move, the next deal, the next billion-dollar opportunity. Little did he know, tonight wasn't going to be just another night. It would be a night that would shake his carefully constructed world to its very core. As he adjusted his tie and took a deep sip of his wine, a soft, polite voice interrupted his thoughts. "Would you like any dessert?" "Mr. Whitaker?" Maya, the young waitress, stood before him, her uniform crisp, her hands steady but her heart racing slightly. She had been working here for several years, serving the richest and most powerful people in the world, but she had never imagined that she would be serving someone like Whitaker. She had heard about his success, his ruthlessness in the business world, but she never thought she would ever cross paths with him. Whitaker glanced up, his sharp eyes scanning her face. She was a black woman, no older than 25, with bright eyes and an air of quiet dignity that stood out amidst the sea of high society. She wasn't like the usual servers he saw, who were quick to smile and eager to please. There was something different about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. But he quickly brushed the thought aside, his indifference returning. "Sure, bring me the chocolate mousse," he said, his tone almost dismissive. "I'll have it later." Maya nodded politely, turned to leave, and yet something stopped Whitaker. A strange feeling gnawed at him, almost as if an invisible thread was pulling him to ask more, something he didn't normally do. He called after her, his voice low but commanding. "Wait!" Maya froze in place. She had no idea why he had called her back. Was it about her service? Or had she done something wrong? Her thoughts raced. But she turned around, her steps measured. "Come here," Whitaker said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "I need to ask you something." She hesitated, 1,000 thoughts running through her mind. But there was something in his gaze, something that made her feel both uncomfortable and curious. She had seen enough in her years of serving rich people to know that wealth and power didn't necessarily mean respect. But in this moment there was no fear. She understood that no matter how much money someone had, they were still human. They still had questions. They still had vulnerabilities. Maya walked over, pulling out the chair and sitting down across from him, her back straight and respectful, but with a quiet sense of confidence. "How can I help you, Mr. Whitaker?" For a long moment, Whitaker didn't speak. He just studied her, as if trying to figure her out. His eyes narrowed slightly, trying to decipher her. There was something about her that intrigued him, a calmness, a steadiness in her presence that was rare among the people he usually interacted with. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than before, almost tentative. "Where are you from?" The question was simple, almost disarming. Most people didn't ask him questions like that. They weren't interested in his background, his past. They only cared about the deal at hand, the power, the money. But Maya was different. She wasn't trying to sell him anything, and for the first time in a long while, Whitaker found himself uncertain. "I'm from Brooklyn," Maya replied, holding his gaze. There was no hesitation in her voice, no need to explain. Brooklyn was a place that shaped her, molded her into the person she was today. "A long way from here," Whitaker observed, and for the first time, there was a faint trace of something in his voice, something like regret or nostalgia. It was fleeting, but it didn't go unnoticed. Maya didn't answer immediately. She had learned over the years that when people like him spoke, it was best to listen, not to argue or question. He was a man of power, a man who had risen from nothing, built an empire, and now he probably felt like the world owed him something. She didn't know his story, but she didn't need to. She had her own. She simply nodded and looked away for a moment, glancing out the window at the city that had always felt both foreign and familiar. But then, something remarkable happened. Maya could feel the tension in the air shift. She couldn't explain it, but it was as if this moment, the mere fact that they were sitting together, was changing something within her. The boundary between the rich and the rest was crumbling in front of her. She realized then that this wasn't just a casual interaction. This was a turning point. Before she could think further, Whitaker spoke again. "Tell me, Maya, what's your dream?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't expected him to ask that. She had always kept her dreams close to her chest, shared with only a few. She had dreams, sure. But who had the time to chase them when you were just trying to get by? She took a breath, then answered simply, "To get out of this. To do something that's mine. To make a real difference, not just serve others." Whitaker leaned back in his chair, his gaze softening. He seemed to be processing her words as if something was stirring within him. Maybe, for the first time in a long while, he saw a reflection of his younger self in her. A time when he, too, had dreamed of something greater than the world he knew. For a moment, the world outside seemed to fade. They were two people, two strangers, connecting in a way that went beyond money, beyond status, beyond the divide that separated them. They were just two humans, trying to figure out their place in the world. Finally, Whitaker stood up, his chair scraping softly against the floor. He gave her a nod, his voice now quieter but filled with something new. Respect. "Thank you, Maya," he said, almost to himself. "You've given me something to think about." And just like that, he walked away, leaving Maya to process what had just transpired. The evening continued as it had before, the hum of the restaurant filling the air once more. But for Maya, everything had changed. It was no longer just about serving meals to the rich and powerful. It was about knowing that even the most distant people had their own dreams, their own struggles, and maybe, just maybe, that was the first step to making a difference in the world. Maya continued her duties, trying to focus on the tasks at hand. She moved from table to table, refilling glasses, delivering plates, all while the buzzing atmosphere of the restaurant swirled around her. But no matter how much she tried to shake it off, the conversation she had with Thomas Whitaker earlier kept replaying in her mind. His sharp gaze, the unexpected question about where she was from, and the strange familiarity in his voice when he spoke to her. Her thoughts were scattered, and the heaviness of that moment lingered like a weight on her chest. Why had he asked her about her background? Why had he stared at her so intently? She had worked in fine dining for years, but no one had ever looked at her like that. Not the way he did. Was it sympathy? Curiosity? Or was it something else, something she couldn't yet define? The evening went on, and as the last of the dinner crowd began to dwindle, Maya's shift neared its end. She walked past Whitaker's table again, but this time she stopped. Something was different. There, resting on the edge of the table, was a guest book, one of the many that patrons of the restaurant signed as part of a long-standing tradition. Maya had seen these books countless times. It was just a formality for the high-profile guests to jot down their names, a gesture that served as a marker of their visit. But today this book caught her eye in a way she hadn't expected. She glanced over, intending to continue her rounds, But then her eyes locked onto the top of the page. It was Whitaker's name, scrawled neatly in his bold handwriting, Thomas Whitaker. It wasn't unusual. He was a frequent guest here. But then, just below his signature, Maya froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. There, in the next line, was a name she recognized instantly. Aileen Washington, her mother. The same name she had seen on countless paintings and sketches. The signature that adorned every piece of art that hung in their modest Brooklyn apartment. Her mother, Aileen Washington, was a celebrated artist, known for her emotional, striking works that explored themes of Black identity, family, and the complexity of human emotions. Maya had grown up surrounded by her mother's art, often watching her paint late into the night. It had always been their bond, art, and Maya had admired her mother's work with an almost reverential awe. But never once had Maya heard her mother mention Thomas Whitaker. In fact, her mother rarely spoke about her personal relationships, especially with people in power. Aileen had always kept her circle small, her focus centered on her art and the impact it had on those who viewed it. So why was her mother's name in Whitaker's guest book? Her hands trembled slightly as she reached out, her eyes scanning the signature again. There was no mistaking it. It was her mother's handwriting, bold, confident, unmistakable. Aileen Washington. Maya's mind raced. The air around her felt heavy, like the world was suddenly slowing down. How could this be? Her mother had never mentioned Thomas Whitaker. He was a billionaire, one of the most powerful men in the world. Why would someone like him have crossed paths with her mother? And if they had, why had her mother never told her about it? Her thoughts spiraled in a million directions. She wanted to turn and leave, to walk away from the uncomfortable tension that had settled into her chest. But she couldn't. She stood there, her eyes fixed on the guest book, feeling like the walls of the restaurant were closing in around her. As she stared at the page, she remembered the conversation she had had with Whitaker earlier. His words came back to her, clearer now than before. "A long way from here," he had said when she told him she was from Brooklyn. It was almost as if he had known something about her past, something that she didn't even know herself. Maya's pulse quickened. Was it possible that her mother and Whitaker had some sort of past? Had they worked together? Had they known each other before Maya was born? The questions kept piling up in her mind. How had her mother been involved with someone like Whitaker? He had built an empire, shaped the business world, and commanded respect in every corner of society. He had likely met hundreds, if not thousands, of people in his lifetime. Was her mother just another name in his past? Or was their connection more significant than she realized? For a moment, Maya felt a deep sense of confusion. She had spent so many years looking up to her mother, admiring her work. Yet here was a part of her mother's life that was completely unknown to her. How could her mother have kept something like this hidden? Before she could process any further, the weight of the guest book in her hands seemed to drag her attention back to the present. She snapped it shut, her mind in turmoil. "Maya?" She hadn't even noticed Whitaker standing up from his table, his sharp eyes fixed on her. The calm that had once been in his demeanor was now replaced by something more guarded. Had he seen her staring at the guest book? Or was he merely continuing the conversation that had started earlier? "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice now softer, more human. Maya's breath caught in her throat. This was not the time to confront him. She wasn't even sure if she was ready to ask the questions burning in her mind. But there was something about his presence that demanded an answer, something in his eyes that spoke of unspoken histories. I didn't know my mother knew you," Maya said quietly, the words escaping her before she could stop them. Whitaker's gaze flickered with surprise, but it quickly faded into something else, recognition, perhaps even a hint of guilt. "Aileen," he said, his voice low. She meant a lot to me, more than she knew." Maya felt her heart race, her mind now ablaze with curiosity. "What do you mean?" she pressed, taking a step closer to the table. "What was your relationship with her?" For a brief moment, Whitaker hesitated. Then, as if coming to terms with something buried deep, he said, "Your mother was my mentor. I didn't build this empire alone. She guided me when I was lost, when I didn't know which way to go. She gave me the courage to take risks, to believe in myself." Maya's chest tightened. The weight of his words hit her harder than anything she could have imagined. She had always thought of her mother's art as a solitary pursuit, her own private world. But here was Whitaker, a billionaire, a man whose name she had heard all her life, admitting that her mother had played a pivotal role in shaping him. Maya stood there in awe. As the pieces of her mother's hidden legacy began to fall into place, Maya's legs moved almost instinctively. Her heart was racing, and though she wasn't entirely sure why, she found herself walking directly toward Whitaker's table once again. The sudden pull of an unseen force seemed to guide her, an overpowering need to uncover more, to understand what had just been revealed. Her feet carried her with purpose, the restaurant's noise fading into the background, her mind focused solely on the man who had been a stranger only hours ago. As she drew nearer, Whitaker looked up in surprise. The faintest flicker of recognition flashed across his face. Back again? His voice was tinged with curiosity, and there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, something far less distant than the usual indifference he carried. Maya stopped in front of him, her breath shallow as she gathered the strength to speak. Her palms were clammy and her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just about serving food anymore. Something deeper was at play, something she couldn't ignore. I need to ask you something, she said, her voice steady, though the tremor in her hands betrayed her nerves. Whitaker raised an eyebrow, his usual guarded demeanor still intact, but something about Maya's urgency had captured his attention. He leaned back in his chair, a slight nod inviting her to continue. "Go ahead," he said, his tone almost nonchalant, though the intrigue in his eyes couldn't be hidden. Maya took a deep breath, mentally steeling herself. She wasn't sure how to ask, how to frame the question that had been burning in her chest ever since she saw that signature. The weight of the guest book in her hands felt almost unbearable. But she couldn't hold back any longer. She pointed to the guest book, her finger trembling slightly as it hovered over the page. "This signature, it's my mother's. How do you know her?" Whitaker's face drained of color. He blinked several times, staring at the name as though seeing it for the first time. His eyes seemed to search the page as though it might offer some kind of explanation, but the truth was already sinking in. He set his glass of wine down so gently it almost seemed deliberate, a gesture of finality. Whitaker stammered, his usually calm voice faltering. I never expected to find her signature here." He stared at the signature for what felt like an eternity, his mind clearly wrestling with a flood of emotions. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper, almost as if speaking in the presence of something sacred. "Your mother, she was my mentor. A long time ago, before I built this empire, Maya's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined a connection like this. Never in a million years would she have guessed that the woman she had grown up admiring, the artist whose paintings had filled their home, could have been intertwined with the man sitting across from her. This billionaire mogul, this figure of power, had learned from her mother? "Mentor?" she repeated, the word foreign in her mouth. "You mean, she worked with you?" Whitaker's expression shifted, the shock slowly melting into a look of deep regret. He exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of pent-up emotion. "Yes," he said, his voice thickening with memories of the past. "I met your mother years ago when I was just starting out. I was lost. I had no real direction, no understanding of what it meant to lead or to build something. Your mother. She saw something in me. She took me under her wing. She taught me more than I could ever repay." Maya's world tilted on its axis. Her mother had mentored him? The very same woman who had always spoken of art with passion, but never once mentioned that her impact reached far beyond her canvas. This was a side of her mother she had never known, a side that was not just about her art, but about her influence in the real world, in the realm of power and business. But, Maya's voice wavered, she never told me about you. She never mentioned you. Whitaker looked at her, his eyes filled with sorrow, guilt, and a deep sadness that seemed to stretch back to a time long past. "She probably didn't," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There was too much pride, too many misunderstandings, and in the end I lost touch with her. We had a falling out. I don't even know where she went. I never got the chance to apologize." Maya's mind raced. Her mother, the woman who had shaped so much of her life, had kept this part of her past hidden from her. She had always known that her mother had been a strong, independent woman, but she never knew the full extent of her influence. The realization hit Maya like a tidal wave. Her mother's legacy was not just in the art she left behind. It was in the people she had shaped, in the lives she had touched. Your mother's influence, Whitaker continued, his voice barely audible now, is far greater than you realize. It's not just in her paintings, Maya. It's in everything she did for me. She taught me how to see beyond the surface, how to find the beauty in things that others overlooked. Without her, I wouldn't be the man I am today. Maya stood in stunned silence, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't just the daughter of an artist. She wasn't just a waitress. She was part of something much larger, a story of mentorship, of loss, of untold connections that had been hidden from her for far too long. Suddenly, Whitaker's hand trembled, and without warning, the wine glass he had been holding slipped from his fingers. The glass shattered loudly against the floor, but neither of them seemed to notice the sound. Maya's heart raced, and she watched as Whitaker's eyes widened, the realization of the situation dawning on him as well. Her legacy, Whitaker whispered, his voice thick with emotion, is far bigger than I ever realized. Maya's chest tightened, and her mind began to spin. The pieces of the puzzle that had been scattered across her life were beginning to fit together, but the picture they were forming was unlike anything she could have imagined. Her mother had been more than an artist. She had been a mentor, a guide, a source of wisdom for someone as powerful as Thomas Whitaker. And yet Maya had never known about it. As Whitaker sat back, his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that spoke volumes. The distance between them, the divide that had once seemed so vast, was now filled with something deeper. It wasn't just an acknowledgement of his past or her mother's influence. It was a shared understanding of how legacy and mentorship ripple through time, shaping lives in ways that couldn't always be seen. Maya stood there, her emotions swirling inside her. She had always felt disconnected from her mother's world, unsure of where she fit in. But in that moment, standing in front of Whitaker, she understood something vital. She wasn't just a bystander to her mother's legacy. She was a part of it, whether she had known it or not. And this wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning. Whitaker's eyes softened as he looked at her. And in that moment, she saw a man who was no longer just the powerful CEO, but a man who had lost something precious, and maybe, just maybe, was beginning to understand what he had truly lost. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, the weight of years of silence and regret hanging in the balance. For Maya, the world around her had shifted, and though the evening would soon come to a close, she knew that her life, her understanding of her mother's legacy, and her place in it had just been irrevocably changed. If you found this story as captivating as we did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Leave us a comment below and let us know your thoughts. What do you think about the unexpected twists in Maya's journey? How do you think her connection to her mother's legacy will unfold? We'd love to hear from you. And remember, sharing is caring. So don't forget to share this story with someone who needs a dose of inspiration today. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the hidden stories around you.